Howdy, pilgrims. This here's Kachi, aka Delakaba, here from the English language team of Russian Fishing 4. And I'm here today to do another informative tutorial style video for you guys. Today we are going to talk about creating a balanced rod setup. Now, there are multiple components that all come together in a perfect storm in order to create a rod setup that's going to be able to do the job, as well as ensure that you don't break your rod, strip your reel, or have other issues of the sort that are going to cost you a lot of silver. So join me now as we discuss the wonders of setting up a balanced setup. Now, of course, when we're talking about setting up a balanced setup, what we're actually talking about is finding a way to bring the three components of your tackle chain into harmony, and those three components are, of course, the rod, the reel, and the line. Now, when we go to the store and we're looking at rods, if we mouse over the little information icon in the corner of a rod, it'll give us all the important information as a quick pop-up when we mouse over it. However, if we actually click the rod's entry, what we're going to find is that there's an information tab in there that we can click, and it will give us, likewise, important information. Now, amongst all the information that's listed here, most important is the load capacity. Now, for the other information, feel free to watch my previous video on rod action, power, and stiffness. Now, what the load capacity of a rod is this dictates how much pressure a rod can endure before it has a critical structural failure. Now, this will be indicated in kilograms in the listings. So you see in our example here a load capacity of 10 kilograms. So it means that this rod, if it existed, would be able to deal with 10 kilograms of force being applied to it before it would overcome the strength of that rod structure, and that rod would collapse or break. Now, our next important component in our chain is, of course, the reel. And the most important statistic for a reel is the max drag. Now, max drag dictates how much pressure a reel can endure before it allows line to be pulled out of the reel. Now, max drag is not how much pressure will lead to a broken reel. A reel can endure 1.5 to 2 times its max drag before it has a structural or mechanical failure. Now, in the game, max drag has 30 levels of adjustment from 1, which is very weak, up through 30, which is lock solid. Now, most reels working in their ideal circumstances and in good repair will run the drag at between 20 and 25 on average. So to understand better how max drag works here in the game, we're going to use the example of a reel with 3 kilograms max drag. Now, knowing we can roll our mouse wheel and adjust that drag between 1 and 30, which is infinity or locked, if we begin to scroll up and raise the drag, what we're actually doing is using more and more of the potential max drag of that reel. So if we had that drag set to 1, it would be the minimum resistance among that max drag, and it would be very easy to pull line out of that reel. Now, on the other hand, if we roll the mouse wheel and bring that drag up to 10, well, 10 is 1/3 of 30, so that would be 1/3 of our max drag, in this case 1 kilogram of drag resistance. If we were to roll it on up to 20, well, that's 2/3 of our total settings, and therefore 2/3 of the max drag. That would be 2 kilograms drag resistance. And if we bring it all the way up, once we hit 29 is when we hit the top end of our adjustable drag resistance. It'd be roughly 2.9 kilograms. And if we go out full on 30, you'll see an infinity signal show up in the center of your indicator, which means that that drag has been locked. No line can leave that reel. Generally not a good idea. Now, when it comes to choosing your reel, always choose a reel with a max drag that is equal to or lower than your rod's load capacity to ensure that you don't inadvertently break your rod. And we're going to discuss more about how a setup with the wrong reel and the wrong line could do that as we get a little farther here in the video. Moving on to our third component, we have, of course, our line. Now, line also has a load capacity, just like rod has a load capacity, and the load capacity or pound test of a line is how much pressure a line can take before it breaks. Now, it's shown not only in pounds but also in kilograms. So when you go to your inventory, for instance, and you look at your line, you'll see that there are two entries, one that says it's 12-pound line and so forth, and then above that, or to the right side of that, if you're in the store, it'll actually show its load capacity in kilograms. Now, this is where we hit the first hard, fast rule about a balanced rod setup, and that is never put line on your rod that has a higher load capacity than the load capacity of your rod. You will break your rod. If you have a rod with a load capacity of 6 kilograms and you go put an 8, 10 or higher kilogram line on that rod, you are risking breakage, and the higher you are above that rated load capacity, the greater the chances are that you're going to break your rod. So this first rule, along with the basic second rule, are the standard measure by which you begin to ensure a balanced setup. So I always choose a line with a load capacity equal to or lower than your rod's load capacity, but furthermore, always choose a reel with a max drag that is equal to or lower than your rod's load capacity. Alrighty, well let's take a look here at a couple of setups that are bad setups and come to an understanding of why they're bad setups and why they would likely break your rod. So the first one that we're going to look at here is bad rigging based on line weight. So we've got a 3 kilogram load capacity rod here, and we got a 3 kilogram max drag reel, but we get our knucklehead on and we turn around and we throw some 10 kilogram load capacity line on that rod. Well, what's going to happen is when a fish comes up and grabs that line that happens to be strong enough to overcome 3 kilograms of resistance and starts to spool you, what's going to happen is when he takes and he pulls that line out to its maximum distance and there's no more line for him to take, that's going to apply full stress to your fishing setup. Well, what's going to happen is, since the 3 kilogram max drag reel can handle up to 6 kilograms of force before it has a critical failure and is destroyed, it means the weakest link in this chain is this 3 kilogram rod, and therefore that rod is going to snap. Remember, always keep your line at or below the load capacity of your rod, or you are risking breakage. Well, you might ask, what if I'm going to put like 9 kilogram line on this 3 kilogram rod? What if I take and I put a 9 kilogram reel on that rod? Won't that fix the problem? And the answer is no, that is also bad rigging, because you have to remember that when we're taking and dialing up our drag, that we're activating a portion of the max drag. So that means that if I dial this up, say to 11, well, that's 1/3 of the total max drag of our 9 kilogram reel that we've got here in the example, and that means 3 kilograms of force. In fact, we're now going over 3 kilograms because we're past 10, and as we dial up our drag higher and higher, we're bringing the amount of max drag into play higher and higher. And so we run into the same problem. The rod can break because the line is much too heavy, and once the drag is set to 11 or more, the max drag on the reel is above 4 kilograms and is greater than the rod's rating. And again, we're looking at breaking a rod. And in both these examples, it's not just when a fish grabs your line and spools you that this can happen. Especially this can happen, snap your rod, if you happen to get hold of a snag and you start jerking and yanking and carrying on trying to get that snag loose. That is a sudden burst of force being applied to that rod, and that results very often in a rod break when your setup is bad. So there you have it in a nutshell. While We certainly could use more examples of setups that might potentially be bad. What I really want to do is avoid beating you about the head and shoulders with too much information. And what you need to take away from this is, number one, always choose a reel with a max drag that is equal to or lower than your rod's load capacity. Number two, always choose a line with a load capacity equal to or lower than your rod's load capacity. And then lastly, it's also wise to use a line that has a load capacity that's equal to or lower than your reel's max drag. Now, before we bring this video to a close, we are going to step up to one other kind of setup that we can do. It's a bit risky. And the thing is before we talk about this alternative setup, we have to understand a little bit about the wear and tear system at work here in the game. Now, in the game, we have a wear and tear system. And with that system, wear on tackle is in percentages. And the percent of wear that's on a piece of tackle will reduce certain critical statistics of that gear by the same percentage. So for example, 10% wear on a rod with a load capacity of 10 kilograms will reduce that load capacity to 9 kilograms. Why? Well, because 10%, which is the damage, 10% of 10 kilograms equals 1 kilogram. And 10 kilograms minus 1 kilogram equals 9 kilograms. Alright, in the same way on reels, 10% wear on a reel with a max drag of 10 kilograms will reduce the max drag to 9 kilograms. Why? Because 10% of 10 kilograms is 1 kilogram. We subtract that from the 10 kilograms minus 1 kilogram equals 9 kilograms. And finally, in the same way, 10% wear on line with a load capacity of 10 kilograms will reduce the load capacity of that line to 9 kilograms because, again, 10% of 10 kilograms is 1 kilogram. We subtract that, 10 kilograms minus 1 kilogram equals 9 kilograms. So what this means is that the more wear that you get on your rod and your reel and your line, the lesser amount of weight that your gear can handle when it comes to dealing with fish. So with that understood, this brings us to the final setup that we're going to talk about today, which is a high-risk setup in which we are min-maxing the setup of a rod and a reel and line to maybe push the envelope a little bit to go after some real big fish. Now, this high-risk min-max setup is using gear with a 3.5 star rating or higher. Now, the star rating is the quality of the fishing gear. Everything in the game has a star rating. That star rating indicates the quality of that thing, and the more stars, the higher quality that thing is. So remember, this is high risk, and it's a min-maxed setup using gear with a 3.5 star rating or higher, and this is being promoted by some YouTubers and streamers, and I want to address this specifically for that reason, because I want you guys to understand what the inherent risks are here. So the way this kind of setup works is that you have a reel with whatever its max drag is. In our example here, 10 kilograms max drag. Well, what you do, since we know that a reel on average can handle 2 times the amount of weight in max drag before it reaches a critical failure, before the reel itself breaks, it means that a 10 kilogram rated reel, 10 kilogram max drag, can theoretically handle 20 kilogram line. So what these min-maxers are doing is they're taking a 10 kilogram reel and they're putting it on a 20 kilogram rod and a 20 kilogram load capacity line on that rod. So of course we know that we never ever put a line on a rod that has a greater load capacity than the rod. So these people are making sure that they're equal to or below the load capacity of the rod with the line that they're using, but under the theory that a reel can handle twice as much as its max drag in actual reel line weight, they're doubling that number and they're slapping this all together. Well, what this means is that when you cast out there and you hook into a big fish, you're taking some serious risks with this rig. First of all, it's very high wear on your reel because the reel is being asked to handle twice the weight of line that it really should. Plus, there's strain that transfers both to and from the rod, so it's doing damage to the rod as well as in turn doing damage to the line. So what this means is if you use this high-risk min-max setup, you are going to have increased repair costs because you're going to have to repair more often. And that's because wear and tear, as we just explained it, may take critical stats of the rod or the reel below the failure point, which will result in a broken rod or reel. All right. And so while this can be done, and if you decide you're willing to risk your hard-earned silver or gold in order to do this, we recommend instead using casting setups, put your time in the game, earn your skill levels, be able to move into the heavy casting reels and heavy rods, the specialized carp rods and things like that. And we recommend using casting setups with high stats rather than using this min-max with spinning reels. And that's because you have to understand, if you set up gear in a bad rig and you break it, the only compensation you're going to get out of it is going to be in wisdom. You're not going to have a means to get your gold or silver back if you do something knuckleheaded and you break your rod. So, like I say, there are some YouTubers and there are some streamers who are out there telling people, oh, well, do it this way. Well, okay, it certainly is possible. All right, and we're not going to dispute that, but remember that you need at least a 3.5 and preferably a 4-star rating on all of your gear. That means your line, your reel, and your rod before you do this. Next, make darn sure that your line, your reel, and your rod are all in perfect condition. Furthermore, keep a darn close eye on it, because as you use it and you put that wear and tear on it, it's going to be losing its capacity as per our discussion on wear and tear, and your risk of breaking it gets higher and higher and higher. And lastly, remember, if you take a risky move like this and you break your crap, don't come crying to us, because you're the one who made the grown-up decision to do something kind of stupid like this. All right, so with that, I'm going to talk about one last thing that people seem to be having a little bit of a struggle with, and then we're going to bring this to a close. And that is, since one of our recent updates, we now measure line capacity on reels by line diameter, meaning that it'll say, you know, you can fit 212 meters of 0.11 millimeter line on this reel. Well, what that means is that if you put 0.11 thick line of any sort, whether it's braid or it's mono or it's fluoro on that line, you're going to get yourself 214 meters of line on that reel. Now, if you go with a line that's thicker than that, well, you're going to get less line on your reel. Why? Because the line is thicker. It's taking up more room. On the other hand, if you go with a line that's thinner than that, you're going to get more line on your reel. Why? Because it's thinner than that 0.11, and as a result, you're likely to get more, possibly 280, maybe even 300 meters of line on that rod. And so people have been having a little bit of a struggle because all of a sudden lines that they were running, you know, 250 meters of line on a reel, suddenly they're not seeing 250 meters of line on that reel anymore. They're seeing, you know, 180 or 210 or whatever. Well, it's because they're running really thick line, and when that update happened, the amount of line on their reel was reduced because they're using line that's thicker than the recommended line diameters for the capacity of the reel. But with that, I'm going to close this because it's already gone on long enough. Thank you so much for joining me, Kachi, aka Dilakba, for this informational video on setting up a balanced setup. Just remember, never run line that is heavier than your rod. And you shouldn't break your rod. You want your line to be the weakest link in the chain so that if all hell breaks loose and something snaps, it's your line that goes, not your rod, not your reel. I will see you guys in the next one, and until then, remember, if you're gonna be a bear, be a grizzly. Sasquatch, Sasquatch, knocking on the trees, chucking rocks and screaming like a troop of chimpanzees. Sasquatch, Sasquatch, running around my place. Are you the missing link, or are you from outer space?